A very good morning to you all. James and I don't talk about what we're going to be preaching on week by week. We don't coordinate our messages in any way at all. And yet earlier this week, I discovered that James was going to be preaching on the love of the Lord. And he did that this morning. Not only that, I discovered that he was going to preach on it out of the same passage from which I was going to speak. And that is Luke 15. I guess the best part of it was that he was going to do the first part of Luke 15 and I was going to do the last part. So at least it's not simply a repeat of the same message. But Luke 15 is one of those very special passages in Scripture. I want to ask you to just pull out a Bible from the seat in front of you there. Just pull it out and turn to Luke chapter 15. There's a scripture, 2 Timothy 3, verse 16. 2 Timothy 3, verse 16, that says that all Scripture is inspired by God. And for those of us who are evangelicals and we're Bible-believing Christians, we acknowledge that all Scripture is inspired by God. There are complications with that whole statement, but nevertheless, that's our fundamental belief and commitment to that truth. However, this morning, I want to take you to sections of Luke chapter 15 that are not inspired. That are not inspired. So if you look at the subtext there, the subheading, the first one will say, the parable of the lost sheep. Is that right? It's not inspired. If you go further down, you'll see one that says the parable of the lost coin. Right? It's not inspired. If you go further down, you'll see it's the parable of the lost son, or something similar, prodigal son perhaps. That's also not inspired. If you go back to the beginning of the chapter, you'll see a big number 15, right? That's not inspired. If you carry on just past that big number 15 and you look at the superscript, it says number 1. That's also not inspired. If you go on a little bit further, you'll see a number 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6, and you can go through the whole chapter. That's not inspired either. Those were simply aids that the translators have put into our Bible to help us get around. So the subheading, the parable of the lost sheep, or the parable of the lost coin, or the parable of the lost son, simply helps us to divide up the chapter, that's all. The number 15 simply helps us to divide up the sections of the book, and the translators have put that in over the years. But they're not inspired, and in fact there are some chapters where it seems that they've got the chapter breaks in all the wrong places. And sometimes it seems that they've got the verse breaks in all the wrong places. But those numbers in and of themselves are not inspired. The rest of the text is inspired, but not the subheadings and not the numbers. And with all due respect to these wonderful, hugely intelligent people who have translated the text from the original, I want to suggest very humbly this morning that they got those subheadings wrong. Parable of the lost sheep, the parable of the lost coin, or the lost son. I really believe that they are not the intent of the passage. And let me explain what I mean by that. Those of you who've been around will know that I've emphasized over and over again the whole idea of if we're going to understand Scripture correctly. Let me just take a step back. You can read any scripture anywhere and God can speak to you through it. It doesn't have to be contextual. It can be something completely out of context. But if ever we're going to teach the scriptures, we need to teach it in context. Historical context. What did the people there hear? What did the people there understand? What did the original writer, what was he wanting to communicate? Those are the kinds of questions that keep the academics going. Otherwise, what would they get paid for? But there's also a structural, grammatical context. So if you look at the first 3 verses of this paragraph, they introduce the context into Jesus telling these stories. There are 3 stories that Jesus told, but look at why he told them. So you start at verse 1. Thanks, Henning. And it says there, tax collectors and other notorious sinners. Sorry, I'm reading from the New Living Translation, which is slightly different from yours. Okay? Tax collectors and other notorious sinners often came to listen to Jesus teach. Tax collectors, again, I've said it so often, corrupt government officials. Sound familiar? They were the ones who came to listen to Jesus. And maybe the reason they don't want to listen anymore is because we've presented Jesus in the wrong way. Tax collectors, notorious sinners, it's usually a euphemism for prostitutes in the town. So you've got here tax collectors and other notorious sinners often came to listen to Jesus teach. This made the Pharisees and teachers of religious law complain. The Pharisees and the teachers of religious law, the Pharisees were a religious stroke political grouping. Teachers of the law were the ones who had the responsibility to do just that, to teach the law. In your older versions, you would have read the scribes and Pharisees. The scribes were the teachers of the law. And they complained about the fact that Jesus was interacting with all of these people. This made the Pharisees and teachers of the religious law complain that he was associating with such sinful people, even eating with them. Now, the Pharisees and the teachers of the law were very serious followers of the Jewish tradition. And they were saying, if you're from God, if you, as you claim to be from God, you would not be mixing with people like that. And then we read this. So, because they were complaining, because they were actually saying, you don't represent God here, we read, so Jesus told them the story. And then he goes on and he tells the story of the shepherd with a flock of 100 sheep, and one gets lost and he goes and finds them. I want to encourage you to get hold of James's message from this morning. That's what he preached on, that first story. Go and get hold of that message on the internet. And then we read the second that he told them a second story. And the second story was about a woman who had 10 pieces of jewelry. And she lost one, and she sweeps out her house until she finds it. 10 coins. I think the NIV says coins, does it? Yeah, does it? Yeah, all right. It says coins. Pieces of jewelry. They would have formed part of a necklace or a bracelet or something like that. And she loses one. And she's so determined to find it. She's so anxious to find it. She sweeps out the house until she does find it. And then the third story is about a father whose son decides that he's had enough and he leaves. And you know the story well. And he comes back. And there's a common thread in each of those stories that the shepherd was so concerned about his flock, every single member of the flock, that he loved them so much that he was prepared to leave the flock and go and find the one. That the woman loved her coins, her jewelry was so precious to her that she swept out the house determined to find the coin. Reminds me of once Val lost her engagement ring. She'd been working in the garden. I'd been playing cricket. Of course, that's the way it goes. And I came home and I found her sitting on the kids' swing and she was in tears. She'd lost her engagement ring. Anyway, we decided that was fine. Went on, and the next year she was again sweeping up the leaves. And she found her engagement ring. I felt really chuffed about that. It had nothing to do with me. I was probably playing cricket again that day. But anyway, it was a year later, and she found her engagement ring. And this woman was determined. She swept out the whole house till she found the coin. And then there's the waiting father. And maybe the subheadings that they really need to be. You see, the stories are not about lost sheep and lost coins and lost sons. The stories really are about loving, caring shepherds The story is really, the subject of the story is about a woman who's determined to find the coin. The story is about a father who's waiting with open arms and open heart to receive his son. Because you see, Jesus wanted the people to hear not about the lost sheep and lost coin and lost son, but about the Father, the God who loved them so much that he was determined to find lost sheep, lost coin, lost son. So I would just personally, it's a personal quirk, would feel so much better if they changed the subheadings. Please will someone write and tell them that your pastor said they should change it, all right? Guess how much joy you'll have. I want to read to you, though, that last story. To illustrate the point further, Jesus told them this story. A man had 2 sons. The younger son told his father, I want my share of your estate now before you die. So his father agreed to divide his wealth between his sons. A few days later, this younger son packed all his belongings and moved to a distant land, and there he wasted all his money in wild living. About the time his money ran out, a great famine swept over the land, and he began to starve. He persuaded a local farmer to hire him, and the man sent him into his fields to feed the pigs. The young man became so hungry that even the pods he was feeding the pigs looked good to him. You should read the Message. Eugene Peterson says that he had to slop out the pigs, and even the slop looked good. I love that word, slop. But no one gave the son anything. When he finally came to his senses, he said to himself, at home, even the hired servants have food enough to spare, and here I am dying of hunger. I will go home to my father and say, Father, I've sinned against both heaven and you, and I'm no longer worthy of being called your son. Please take me on as a hired servant. So he returned home to his father, and while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming. Filled with love and compassion, he ran to his son. He embraced him and kissed him. And his son said to him, Father, I've sinned against both heaven and you, and I'm no longer worthy of being called your son. But his father said to the servants, quick, bring the finest robe in the house and put it on him. Get a ring for his finger and sandals for his feet, and kill the calf we've been fattening. We must celebrate with a feast, for the son of mine was dead and has now returned to life. He was lost, but now he is found. And so the party began. Oh, you all know that story. I didn't need to read it, did I? You know it so well. But I deliberately wanted to read it. One of the things that those of us who are pastors get to do is to take funerals. At funerals, I experience different emotions from time to time. I go through deep sadness, not always, but particularly with people I know. I have a sense of sadness, heartache. At other times, I feel a sense of helplessness and frustration that I can't help those who are mourning. That feels that my words are just empty because there's nothing that I can do that can make a difference for them. And that frustrates me. Often I doubt whether people are even listening, especially if folk have just sort of had to come together for a funeral, and it seems to make no difference. For me, funerals are a great reminder of the hope of the Christian faith, that this life is not all that there is. But one time, I never had any of those responses. One time, I took a funeral and I was angry. Let me try and explain. It was a funeral of a man who had taken his own life by shooting himself in his car one night. I got a call early one morning, it was about 5:30, from one of our church members saying that her neighbor had just had this experience and would I come round and visit with her neighbor who wasn't a churchgoer at all. I went round, I got there about 6:37, can't quite remember now. I got into the kitchen, and there was this lady, obviously deeply distraught, obviously been crying a lot, and our church member and one other neighbor were there trying to encourage her. Anyway, we spoke for a while, and I prayed with her. And then she asked me if I would come with her into the TV room because she needed to break the news to her 5 and 7-year-old daughters. We went through to the TV room, and there were these 2 beautiful little girls. And she started in the most wonderful way to tell them what had happened, that their father had shot himself. And then the 7-year-old looked up to her and said, "But Mommy, why did he do that? Why did he do that?" And then, in a moment of what I regard as pure inspiration, she said in the gentlest of voices, a sentence that I've never forgotten. She said, "A bad voice made him do it. A bad voice made him do it." And I'd arrived at this magnificent home. Beautiful home, long driveway, massive boat at the bottom end of the driveway. The house was beautiful. I went inside. There was this beautiful lady crying. There were these 2 beautiful girls. And I got to saying to myself, yeah, this happened because a bad voice made him do it. But what did that bad voice say to him? I understood more of what the bad voice said when it got to the funeral itself. He was a well-known businessman in the area, extremely wealthy. He had a hugely successful business, had nothing but the best in his home. He had everything going for him. He was well known in the community, in the boating fraternity. And yet he had sat in a car one dark night with a gun in his hand and shot himself. At the funeral, the people started arriving. They were all mainly his business associates, and of course a few people from Hout Bay as well. But mainly his business associates. And they all came in their designer clothing. One thing I remember clearly about that, our building was too small. We had to have it in a larger building in Hout Bay. And one thing I recall is that everybody who came wore black. That's not common at funerals these days, but everybody wore black. But it wasn't just ordinary black. They were chic. It was beautiful dresses, magnificent suits. They all arrived in the very best of cars. And as I sat there in front looking out over the congregation just before we started, I found this anger welling up inside of me. And the anger wasn't at all against the people or the man. The anger was against the one who had told him the lie. Because you see, what happened was that there was a bad voice that told him to do that. And the voice had come from the pit of hell. And I was angry. I found emotionally angry. I had to rein myself in going into the service itself. Because you see, here were all these people, all wonderful people, all well known in their circles and in their communities and in their families, and I'm sure very similar. And it seemed to me that they had also believed the lie, that along with this guy, this voice that had told him he wasn't good enough and he wasn't acceptable and he might as well just end it all. And he did that. And here were these people who had everything. And I thought, they've imbibed the lie as well. They have. Along with all the advertising and the media exposure and everything else. Because you see, the lie is still out there. All the media, the men and women believing that they needed to chase the lie, that they would find satisfaction if they had just a little bit more, just a little bit better, just a little bit more beautiful. Until it comes to the point where you say, hang, maybe it's not all in this stuff. And that's what this man had discovered. And he ended it. Yet for him, believing the lie was the only way out. He hadn't heard, or at least he definitely hadn't understood about the fact that there was a God who loved him as a father loves his children and was saying, you can come to me. He hadn't heard that. And the story that Jesus told, that we call the story of the prodigal son, is it's about the father accepting the son, even if you haven't proved yourself. One of the things that bothers me is that so many people are still chasing their tails and finding themselves sitting in pigsties and saying, I've just got to get out of this and everything will be okay. And I'll brush off the slop. I'll try and get out. Trying desperately to find some satisfaction in life. And at this funeral, they believed the lie. It was obvious from what I saw in front of me, what I experienced after the funeral as well. No one would ever have guessed. And I did wonder how many of them might one day end up in a car with their gun in their hands. I did wonder. You see, this man's pigsty was a luxury vehicle. And then I started wondering, so I wonder how many people here are sitting in pigsties. Having believed the lie that life will find some meaning if only you could have more, bigger, better, more beautiful. If only that were possible. But folks, it's a lie that comes from the pit of hell. And it's worth being angry at. But, no one would ever guess here. I mean, nice people, lovely people. People here be sitting in pigsties. Well, pigsties take different forms. For that man, it was his vehicle. For others, it's the shape of a bottle, either a big bottle or a little pill bottle. For others, it's the shape of a TV monitor. And all the junk that gets put out there as you view your pornography or anything else. For others, it's your possessions or your car, your home, your money. For others, it's even the tranquility of retirement or even doing good works. If only we did more charitable works, everything would be fine. Anything to quiet and that voice that's screaming inside that says you're not good enough. You're not good enough. And you might as well end it all. So what's your pigsty? The Pharisees believed that about God. They believed that you had to prove yourself in order to be acceptable to God. And proving yourself meant that you had to live in a certain way according to their preconditions. Now, don't get me wrong. There's nothing wrong with doing good. There's nothing wrong with trying to live a good life. There's nothing wrong with having possessions, with being blessed with huge amounts of possessions. Nothing wrong with that. But when you try and make that your God, that's when the lie kicks in. And here was Jesus mixing with these people who were totally unacceptable to the Pharisees and the scribes. And Jesus told 3 stories so that they would know what God is really like. That's why he told the stories. That God is caring, loving enough to go looking for you. And again, listen to James's message from this morning. That God is determined enough that he's going to find you because he loves you. That God is willing to wait as long as it takes if you'll just come back. He's one who loves you. The alternative is to stay in the pigsty and hope that you have enough courage to not end it all one day by your own hand. Sometimes, the reason we don't hear God speak through these stories, we don't hear Jesus speak to us, is because we're so familiar with them. You probably were distracted enough and you didn't concentrate through the reading of the story. I'm sure for many of you that would have been, because you know it, you know what's coming up next. We got so used to the stories and even the language, and I did use a slightly different translation to try and just make it a little bit different. But it's still so easy to get bored with it because we've heard it all before. Philip Yancey has written a number of outstanding books, and I want to encourage you with all that I have to get hold of a book entitled What's So Amazing About Grace? I'm sure that many of you have read it. If you haven't read it, please, the library's open. Let me use this as a bit of an ad very quickly. Please use the library. It's at the end of the passage behind this wall. All right? Please use the library. Some wonderful books there. What's so amazing about grace? Philip Yancey has taken the title, Amazing Grace, How Sweet the Sound, of that hymn, and he said, okay, so what is so amazing about grace? And he explains grace beautifully in the book. One of the things that he says in the book is this very thing that I've just been saying, that so often people don't hear the stories, they don't hear about God's love anymore because we've become so used to it. And he makes a suggestion. He says what we need to do is to tell the story in modern day terms, and try to put it into a context that we understand. There are not many of us who have fed pigs in pigsties. It's hard to identify. And so he suggested that we try to imagine how Jesus would tell the story today. And I've done that. I've taken his story, which is American-based, and I've translated it into South Africanese. English we use in South Africa. And it would probably come out something like this. The story of the prodigal daughter. I've read it to you before, some years back, but hear it again now. A young girl grows up in Loxton in the Karoo. Her somewhat old-fashioned parents overreact to her nose ring, her music, and the length of her skirts. Her anger grows after they ground her a few times. I hate you, she screams to end an argument, and that night acts on a plan she's been rehearsing for some while. And she runs away. She's only visited Joburg once before, but the newspapers in Loxton report in detail on the gangs, the drugs, the violence in places like Hillbrow. Her parents will assume she's gone to Durban or Cape Town, but never Hillbrow. Her second day there, she meets a man who drives the smartest car she's ever seen. He offers her a ride, buys her lunch, arranges a place for her to stay. He gives her some pills that make her feel better than she's ever felt before. She was right all along. Her parents were keeping her from all the fun. The good life continues for about a year. The man with the smart car, she calls him boss, teaches her a few things that men like. And since she's underage, men pay a premium for her. She lives in a penthouse and orders room service whenever she wants. Occasionally she thinks about her folks back home, but their lives now seem so boring that she can hardly believe she grew up there. She has a brief scare when she sees her picture and name on the community notice board in the local spa with the headline, "Have you seen this girl?" But now with all the makeup, the jewelry, the body piercing, nobody would recognize her. Besides, all her friends are runaways and nobody squeals in Hillbrow. It takes a full year for the signs of illness to appear. And it amazes her how fast her boss turns mean. Before she knows it, she's out on the street without a penny to her name. She still turns a couple of tricks a night, but the money goes to support her habit. There's nothing left for lodging. She sleeps outside ShopRite on a cardboard bed. Sleeping is the wrong word too. A young girl on her own in Hillbrow can never drop her guard. Dark bands circle her eyes. Her cough worsens. One night as she lies awake listening for footsteps, everything around her looks different. She no longer feels like a woman of the world. She feels like a little girl lost in a cold and frightening city. She begins to whimper. Her pockets are empty and she's hungry. She needs a fix. She pulls her legs tight underneath her and shivers under the newspaper she's piled on top of herself. Something jolts in her mind and she sees the stream outside Loxton. She hears her 3 dogs barking. She smells her mother's Sunday roast. Oh God, why did I ever leave? And the pain stabs at her heart. My dogs at home eat better than I do now. And sobbing, she knows that she wants to go home. 3 phone calls all get the answering machine. 3rd time she speaks. Mom, Dad, it's me. I was wondering about coming home. I'm catching the bus through Loxton. It arrives about midnight. If you're not there, I'll stay on board and just keep on going. It takes 7 hours by bus. During that time, she realizes the flaws in her plan. What if her folks are out of town? Shouldn't she have waited to talk to them first? Anyway, they've probably written her off for dead by now. She should have given them time to get over the shock. She tries to imagine what she'll say. Dad, I'm sorry, I was wrong. It's not your fault. Can you forgive me? It's hard. She hadn't apologized to anyone for years. When the bus pulls up at the garage in front of the Wimpy, the driver announces, 15 minutes, this old man, sir. 15 minutes to decide her life. She checks herself in her mirror, licks the lipstick off her teeth, smooths her hair, wonders if they'll notice the tobacco stains on her fingers, wonders if they're there. She walks slowly down the aisle, eyes fixed on the steps so that she doesn't slip. But nothing could prepare her for what she sees next. And there beneath the Wimpy sign stands a group of 40 brothers and sisters and great aunts and uncles and cousins and grandmother and great-grandmother too. And they're all wearing party hats and holding a huge banner that reads, "Welcome home." And her dad breaks away from the group. Struggling through his hug, she stares out through her tears in her eyes and begins to speak. Dad, I'm sorry, and he interrupts her. Quiet girl. No time for that now. No time for apologies. You'll be late for the party. Dinner's waiting for us all at home. It's a 2,000-year-old story. And the truth remains the same. Your Father is just waiting for you to come home. To come home. And today you have to ask yourself, are you going to believe the Lord? Or are you going to believe the lie? Because you can start over. You see, that's what's so amazing about grace. no matter what circumstances you're in, your Father is saying, just come back, just come home, because I love you. You just have to come home. You can't stay in the pigsty. You just have to come home. And the Lord is just waiting for you to recognize your pigsty. And to say, it's time I went back. It's time to go home. Just talk to him. Talk to your Father right now. Why don't you do that on your own?